Hello there, and welcome to today's episode. Have you ever wondered why, despite all our efforts to improve our lives, happiness often feels just out of reach? Why do we sometimes wake up feeling like we're our own worst enemy? The answer might be simpler than you think, yet profoundly transformative when understood. Today, we're diving deep into the world of self-compassion, what many experts now believe is the missing piece in our collective quest for mental wellness. I'm Dr. Olivia Bennett, and I'm thrilled to have you join me as we explore why being kind to yourself might be the most important relationship you'll ever nurture. Before we begin this journey together, I want you to take a moment and reflect. How do you speak to yourself when you make a mistake? What voice echoes in your mind when you look in the mirror? For many of us, that voice is harsh, critical, and unforgiving, a voice we would never use with someone we'll love. Today, we'll discover why transforming that inner dialogue isn't just nice to have, it's essential for your mental health. The concept of self-compassion has roots in ancient wisdom traditions, but has now been validated by cutting-edge neuroscience and psychological research. It's not just another self-help trend, it's a fundamental shift in how we relate to ourselves that can rewire our brains, strengthen our resilience, and dramatically improve our well-being. Whether you're struggling with anxiety, depression, stress, or simply the everyday challenges of being human in our complex world, self-compassion offers a pathway forward that's both powerful and accessible. In today's episode, we'll explore what self-compassion truly means, why it's so challenging for many of us, and most importantly, how you can cultivate it in your own life starting today. We'll look at the science behind why being kind to yourself actually makes you stronger, not weaker, and how it differs from self-esteem or self-indulgence. I'll share practical techniques that you can implement immediately, stories of transformation from my clinical practice, and insights from the world's leading researchers in this field. So if you've ever felt that you're not good enough, that you're somehow fundamentally flawed, or that you need to be perfect to be worthy of love and belonging, this episode is especially for you. Let's begin this exploration together with open hearts and minds as we discover why self-compassion might just be the key that unlocks a more fulfilling and mentally healthy life. When I talk about self-compassion with my patients for the first time, I often see a mix of reactions: skepticism, confusion, and sometimes even resistance. There's a common misconception in our culture that being hard on ourselves is necessary for success, that self-criticism is motivating, and that self-compassion is somehow a form of self-indulgence or laziness. Nothing could be further from the truth, and the scientific evidence is now overwhelming on this point. So what exactly is self-compassion? At its core, self-compassion is about treating yourself with the same kindness, concern, and support you'd offer to a good friend who was suffering or struggling. It's about recognizing that imperfection is part of the shared human experience and that you deserve compassion just as much as anyone else does. It's not about letting yourself off the hook or making excuses. It's about responding to your own struggles with warmth and understanding rather than harsh judgment. Dr. Kristin Neff, a pioneer in the scientific study of self-compassion, breaks it down into three essential components. The first is self-kindness versus self-judgment. This means being gentle and understanding toward ourselves rather than harshly critical or judgmental. The second is common humanity versus isolation. This involves recognizing that suffering and personal failures are part of the shared human experience, something everyone goes through rather than something that happens to me alone. And the third component is mindfulness versus over-identification. This means holding our painful thoughts and feelings in balanced awareness rather than over-identifying with them. These three components work together to create a mental and emotional state that's conducive to genuine well-being and personal growth. Far from being self-indulgent, self-compassion actually provides us the emotionally supportive environment needed to thrive and reach our full potential. Let me share a story from my clinical practice that illustrates this beautifully. I once worked with a client, let's call her Emma, who was a high-achieving attorney. Emma came to therapy because despite her outward success, she was struggling with crippling anxiety and insomnia. As we began to explore her inner world, I discovered that Emma had what I call an inner tyrant, A relentlessly critical inner voice that drove her to work harder and achieve more, but never allowed her to feel satisfied or worthy. Emma's inner dialogue was filled with phrases like, "You should be doing better," "That presentation wasn't good enough," and "Everyone's going to realize you're a fraud." She believed this harsh inner critic was what had driven her success, and she was terrified that if she became more compassionate toward herself, she would lose her edge and stop achieving. But the reality was quite different. Emma's self-criticism was actually holding her back. It was causing anxiety that interfered with her sleep, which in turn impaired her cognitive function. It made her defensive when receiving feedback because any criticism from others activated her already overwhelming sense of shame and inadequacy. And it made it impossible for her to truly connect with colleagues and clients because she was always performing rather than being authentic. Over several months of therapy, Emma began to practice self-compassion. She learned to notice her critical inner voice and respond to it with understanding rather than believing everything it said. She began to recognize that her mistakes and struggles didn't make her uniquely flawed, but were part of being human. And she developed a kinder, more supportive inner dialogue. The results were transformative. Not only did Emma's anxiety decrease and her sleep improve, but her work performance actually got better. Without the constant drain of self-criticism, she had more mental and emotional energy available for creative problem solving. She became more collaborative because she was less defensive. And perhaps most importantly, she started to enjoy her life and her accomplishments rather than constantly striving for the next achievement in a never-ending quest for worthiness. Emma's story is not unique. It reflects a pattern I've seen countless times in my practice, and one that's been documented in scientific research. Far from diminishing our drive or effectiveness, self-compassion actually enhances our functioning in almost every domain of life. Let's look at what the research tells us about the benefits of self-compassion for mental health. Studies have consistently shown that higher levels of self-compassion are associated with lower levels of anxiety and depression. This makes intuitive sense when you think about it. If you're constantly berating yourself, of course you're going to feel anxious and down. But the research goes deeper than this obvious connection. Self-compassion has been shown to reduce rumination, which is that repetitive loop of negative thinking that many people with anxiety and depression experience. It helps regulate our stress response by activating the parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes called the rest and digest system, which counteracts the fight or flight response that characterizes anxiety. And it reduces shame, which is a powerful driver of depression and social anxiety. But the benefits don't stop at reducing negative experiences. Self-compassion is also associated with more positive psychological states. People with higher levels of self-compassion report greater happiness, optimism, and life satisfaction. They show more curiosity and exploration, which leads to deeper learning and growth. And they have stronger interpersonal relationships, partly because the way we treat ourselves sets the template for how we allow others to treat us. What's particularly interesting is that self-compassion predicts many of the same positive outcomes as high self-esteem, but without the downsides. High self-esteem is often contingent on success and social approval, which means it can fluctuate dramatically based on external circumstances. It can also lead to narcissism, social comparison, and defensive behavior when our self-image is threatened. Self-compassion, by contrast, provides a more stable foundation for psychological well-being because it's not contingent on external validation or success. It acknowledges that we are inherently worthy of kindness and care simply because we're human, not because we've achieved certain benchmarks or outperformed others. This makes it a more reliable source of positive self-regard, especially during difficult times when self-esteem often abandons us. Now, you might be wondering why, if self-compassion is so beneficial, it doesn't come more naturally to many of us. The answer lies partly in our biology and partly in our cultural conditioning. From an evolutionary perspective, our brains developed a negativity bias as a survival mechanism. Essentially, our ancestors who were more attuned to threats and problems were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. So we've inherited brains that are predisposed to notice what's wrong rather than what's right, including what might be wrong with us. This served us well in an environment where physical dangers were common, but it's less helpful in our modern context where psychological threats often predominate. On top of this biological predisposition, many of us have been conditioned from an early age to believe that self-criticism is necessary for improvement and achievement. Parents, teachers, coaches, and other authority figures may have used criticism as a motivational tool, inadvertently teaching us that this is the way to drive ourselves towards success. Our broader culture reinforces this through media messages that simultaneously promote impossible standards of success, beauty, and achievement while suggesting that the way to reach these standards is through rigid self-discipline and self-criticism. For many people, there's also a deeper psychological dynamic at play. If you grew up in an environment where love and approval were conditional on your performance or behavior, you may have internalized the belief that you need to be hard on yourself to be worthy of love and belonging. Self-criticism becomes a way of trying to control the uncontrollable, ensuring that you'll be good enough to deserve a care and connection. The good news is that despite these biological and cultural obstacles, self-compassion is a skill that can be learned and developed with practice. Our brains remain plastic throughout our lives, meaning they can form new neural pathways with repeated experience. By consistently practicing self-compassion, we can actually rewire our brains to make this response more automatic and natural over time. There's a growing body of research showing that structured interventions to increase self-compassion, such as mindful self-compassion training developed by Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, can lead to significant improvements in psychological well-being. These programs typically involve a combination of mindfulness practices, guided meditations, informal exercises for daily life, and techniques for working with challenging emotions. But you don't need to enroll in a formal program to begin cultivating self-compassion in your life. There are simple practices you can start incorporating today that can make a significant difference. Let me share a few of these with you. One powerful practice is what Dr. Neff calls a self-compassion break. This involves 3 steps that correspond to the 3 components of self-compassion. First, acknowledge your suffering with mindfulness. This is a moment of suffering, or this is really difficult right now. Second, recognize the common humanity in your experience. Suffering is a part of life. Or, I'm not alone in this struggle. Many others have felt this way. And third, offer yourself kindness. May I be kind to myself in this moment, or may I give myself the compassion I need? Another helpful practice is to develop a self-compassionate inner voice or imagined figure. Think about how a truly loving, wise friend or mentor would speak to you when you're struggling. What tone would they use? What might they say? Try writing a letter to yourself from this perspective, or simply imagining this compassionate presence when you're having a hard time. Physical gestures of self-soothing can also activate the caring system in our bodies. Placing a hand on your heart, giving yourself a gentle hug, or simply adopting a more comfortable and supportive posture can trigger the release of oxytocin, the hormone associated with bonding and caregiving. For those who find direct self-compassion challenging, it can sometimes be easier to start with compassion for others and then gradually extend that same care to yourself. You might practice loving kindness meditation, where you systematically send wishes for well-being to others and then to yourself. Or you might reflect on how you would respond to a dear friend or a child with the same struggle you're experiencing, and then try to offer yourself that same response. It's important to note that developing self-compassion is not always a smooth or easy process. Many people encounter what psychologists call backdraft, a phenomenon where initially moving towards self-compassion brings up more pain or resistance. This happens because when we begin to be kind to ourselves, we sometimes become more aware of how much we've suffered from our own self-criticism, which can be painful to recognize. If you experience this kind of resistance or increased emotional discomfort when practicing self-compassion, it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong or that self-compassion isn't for you. Rather, it's a normal part of the healing process. The key is to acknowledge this resistance with compassion itself, to go slowly, and to seek support if you need it. Working with a therapist who understands self-compassion can be particularly helpful if you find yourself struggling with this process. Now, I want to address some common misconceptions about self-compassion that often hold people back from embracing this practice. One of the most persistent myths is that self-compassion will make you complacent or diminish your drive to improve and achieve, but research shows exactly the opposite. People with higher levels of self-compassion are actually more likely to take responsibility for their mistakes, to learn from failures, and to persist in the face of setbacks, all qualities that lead to greater achievement in the long run. The reason for this is that self-compassion creates a sense of safety that allows us to acknowledge our shortcomings without being overwhelmed by shame or defensive denial. When we know we'll still be acceptable and worthy, even if we fail, we're more willing to take risks, to admit when we need to improve, and to pick ourselves up and try again after a setback. Another common misconception is that self-compassion is selfish or self-indulgent. But as the analogy of airline oxygen masks reminds us, we need to secure our own well-being before we can effectively help others. Self-compassion actually makes us more available for compassionate action toward others because it replenishes our emotional resources rather than depleting them. Research has shown that people who are more self-compassionate also tend to be more compassionate toward others, more likely to forgive, and more willing to compromise in relationships. Some people also worry that self-compassion will leave them vulnerable to exploitation or mistreatment by others. But in reality, self-compassion strengthens our boundaries and helps us stand up for ourselves when necessary. When we truly care about our own well-being, we're less likely to tolerate relationships or situations that are harmful to us. Self-compassion helps us recognize that we deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, not only by ourselves, but by others as well. Finally, there's the misconception that self-compassion is only relevant when we're suffering from major life challenges or mental health issues. While it's certainly valuable in those contexts, self-compassion is equally important in our everyday lives. It helps us navigate the small disappointments, frustrations, and failures that are an inevitable part of being human. It supports us in making healthier choices, from what we eat to how we spend our time and energy. And it enriches our experience of positive emotions and achievements by allowing us to truly savor and appreciate the good in our lives, rather than immediately moving on to the next goal or standard to meet. For many of us, self-compassion represents a radical shift in how we relate to ourselves. It challenges deeply ingrained habits of thought and emotion that may have been with us since childhood. Such a transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it's natural to experience setbacks along the way. The key is to approach this journey with patience and, yes, compassion for yourself in the process. Remember that developing self-compassion is not another standard to meet perfectly, but a practice to return to again and again, especially when you stumble. Let's talk now about how self-compassion can help us navigate specific mental health challenges. While it's beneficial for everyone, self-compassion can be particularly transformative for those struggling with certain psychological difficulties. For people with depression, self-compassion offers an alternative to the harsh self-criticism and rumination that often characterize this condition. Depression frequently involves what psychologists call a negative cognitive triad: negative views about oneself, the world, and the future. Self-compassion directly counters the self-loathing component of this triad, providing a more balanced and kind perspective on oneself. Research has shown that interventions that increase self-compassion can significantly reduce depressive symptoms, and for some people, they're as effective as traditional therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy. Anxiety disorders also respond well to self-compassion practices. Anxiety often involves fear of failure, judgment, or negative evaluation, fears that are amplified by self-criticism. When we're self-compassionate, we create an inner environment of safety that can help regulate the threat detection system in our brains that drives anxiety. Additionally, the mindfulness component of self-compassion helps us observe anxious thoughts without becoming overwhelmed by them, while the common humanity element reminds us that anxiety is a shared human experience rather than a personal failing. For those with trauma histories, self-compassion can be a crucial part of the healing journey. Trauma, especially interpersonal trauma, often leaves people with deep shame and a sense of fundamental unworthiness. These individuals may have internalized messages that they are to blame for their traumatic experiences, or that they are somehow damaged or unlovable because of what happened to them. Self-compassion offers a pathway to challenging these beliefs and developing a new relationship with oneself based on kindness rather than condemnation. It's worth noting, however, that for trauma survivors, approaching self-compassion needs to be done with particular care and often with professional support. Some trauma-informed therapies now incorporate self-compassion as a component, recognizing its value while also understanding the unique challenges it may present for those with complex trauma histories. Eating disorders represent another area where self-compassion can be especially healing. These conditions are often fueled by harsh body criticism, perfectionism, and shame. By fostering a kinder relationship with oneself, including one's body, self-compassion can help interrupt the cycles of restriction, binging, and purging that characterize eating disorders. It can also address the underlying emotional struggles that drive disordered eating by providing healthier ways of coping with difficult feelings. Even for those without diagnosable mental health conditions, self-compassion can be a powerful tool for managing stress and preventing burnout. In our achievement-oriented culture, many people drive themselves relentlessly towards success while ignoring their body's signals of exhaustion or overwhelm. Self-compassion helps us recognize and honor our human limitations, take breaks when needed, and prioritize our well-being alongside our accomplishments. Now, for all these benefits to become real in your life, self-compassion needs to move from an intellectual concept to an embodied practice. It's not enough to understand self-compassion. We need to experience it and incorporate it into our daily lives. Let me share some additional practices that can help you cultivate self-compassion more deeply. One powerful approach is to work directly with your inner critic. Start by simply noticing when the critical voice emerges. What situations tend to trigger it? What exactly does it say? How does it make you feel? Just bringing awareness to this pattern is the first step toward changing it. Then, try to get curious about this inner critic rather than immediately trying to fight it or push it away. Often, beneath the harsh criticism is a part of ourselves that's actually trying to help or protect us in some misguided way. Maybe it believes that criticizing you will keep you safe from external judgment or rejection. Maybe it's trying to motivate you to achieve or improve. Understanding the positive intention behind the criticism can help you respond to it with compassion rather than resistance. Once you've developed this awareness and understanding, you can begin to transform the critical voice. This doesn't mean silencing it completely, but rather shifting its tone and message to something more constructive and supportive. When you notice self-criticism arising, pause and ask yourself, how could I express this concern in a more kind and helpful way? What would someone who truly cares about me say in this situation? Another helpful practice is to develop what psychologists call self-compassionate goals as opposed to self-image goals. Self-image goals focus on how you appear to others and maintaining a certain impression, which tends to increase stress and decrease well-being. Self-compassionate goals, by contrast, focus on learning, growth, and contributing in ways that are meaningful to you. Research has shown that people who shift towards self-compassionate goals experience greater well-being and better relationships. Mindfulness meditation is also a foundational practice for developing self-compassion because it helps us develop the capacity to observe our thoughts and feelings without becoming completely identified with them. Even a few minutes of mindfulness practice each day can strengthen this ability to step back and observe our experience with greater clarity and equanimity. For those who connect well with imagery, visualizations can be a powerful way to access feelings of self-compassion. You might imagine yourself as a child, offering that younger version of yourself the compassion and understanding they may not have received. Or you might envision a place of safety and comfort, a personal sanctuary where you can retreat in your mind when you're struggling and need to connect with your compassionate self. Writing can also be a transformative tool for cultivating self-compassion. Try keeping a self-compassion journal where you process difficult experiences through the lens of mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. For each challenging situation, acknowledge your feelings without judgment, connect to the shared human experience within your struggle, and write down some words of compassion and support for yourself. For those who find traditional meditation or self-reflection practices challenging, compassion can also be cultivated through the body. Activities like yoga, tai chi, qigong, or even simple stretching done with mindful awareness can help us develop a more compassionate relationship with our physical selves. These practices invite us to be present with our bodies without judgment, to honor our limitations while gently exploring our capabilities, and to approach discomfort with curiosity rather than criticism. Nature can also be a powerful gateway to self-compassion. Spending time outdoors, especially in natural settings that evoke a sense of awe or peace, can help shift us out of our self-critical mind and into a broader perspective. Nature reminds us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, which connects to the common humanity aspect of self-compassion. And the inherent rhythms of the natural world, the changing seasons, the cycle of growth and rest, can teach us to honor similar rhythms in our own lives rather than pushing ourselves to be constantly productive. Community support is another important element in developing self-compassion. While much of the work happens within our own minds and hearts, having a supportive community can make a tremendous difference. This might mean connecting with friends who are also interested in personal growth, joining a meditation or mindfulness group, working with a therapist who incorporates self-compassion in their approach, or participating in a structured program specifically focused on self-compassion. Now, as you begin or continue your journey with self-compassion, it's important to recognize that different practices will resonate differently with each person. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to developing self-compassion. Some people connect deeply with meditation and visualization practices, while others find them difficult to engage with. Some prefer writing or artistic expression, while others learn best through movement or interpersonal connection. The key is to explore various approaches and notice what feels helpful and nourishing for you personally. You might think of it as creating your own self-compassion toolkit, a collection of practices and resources that you can draw on as needed in different situations and emotional states. It's also worth noting that the practices that serve you best may change over time or in different contexts. During periods of acute stress or crisis, very simple and accessible practices like the self-compassion breaker hand on heart gesture might be most helpful. During more stable times, you might benefit from deeper exploration through longer meditations, journaling, or group work. Be flexible in your approach and trust your own experience of what supports your well-being. As we begin to cultivate greater self-compassion, we often notice ripple effects that extend far beyond our individual experience. Our relationships frequently improve as we become less defensive, more authentic, and more able to extend compassion to others. Our work lives can transform as we learn to motivate ourselves through encouragement rather than criticism, and to recover more quickly from setbacks. And our physical health often benefits as self-compassion leads to better self-care behaviors and reduced stress. But perhaps the most profound shift is in our overall relationship with life itself. When we're caught in patterns of harsh self-criticism, life often feels like a test that we're constantly failing. We see challenges as threats to our self-worth rather than opportunities for growth. And we miss much of the beauty and joy available in each moment because we're so focused on our perceived inadequacies or on striving to prove our value. Self-compassion offers a different way of being. It allows us to embrace our humanity in all its messy, imperfect glory. It helps us recognize that vulnerability isn't weakness, but rather the source of our deepest connections and most authentic expressions. And it reminds us that we don't need to earn our place in the world. We belong simply because we are here, part of the intricate web of life, inherently worthy of kindness and care. This more compassionate relationship with ourselves eventually translates into a more compassionate relationship with life. We can hold our deepest aspirations with care while also accepting the reality of what is in this moment. We can acknowledge suffering our own and others without being overwhelmed by it. And we can find meaning and purpose not in reaching some idealized version of ourselves, but in living authentically and contributing what we uniquely have to offer. In my years of clinical practice, I've had the privilege of witnessing hundreds of people transform their relationship with themselves through self-compassion. I've seen people recover from depression that had plagued them for decades, break free from crippling anxiety, heal from trauma, and discover a sense of wholeness and well-being they never thought possible. And I've experienced this transformation in my own life as well, which is why I'm so passionate about sharing these practices with you today. The journey towards self-compassion is not always easy or straightforward. There will likely be moments of resistance, confusion, or backsliding into old patterns. But each time you choose a compassionate response over a critical one, you're strengthening new neural pathways and moving toward a more supportive relationship with yourself. Each act of self-kindness is significant, no matter how small it might seem. As we begin to wrap up our time together today, I want to leave you with a simple invitation. In the next 24 hours, see if you can notice one moment when you're being hard on yourself. In that moment, try placing a hand on your heart, taking a deep breath, and offering yourself some words of kindness, whatever would feel supportive and genuine to you in that moment. Just this one small gesture repeated over time can begin to shift patterns that may have been with you for years or even decades. And remember that you're not alone in this journey. Millions of people around the world are working to cultivate greater self-compassion in their lives. We're part of a growing movement toward a more compassionate world, one that begins with how we treat ourselves and then naturally extends to how we treat one another and our planet. If you've found value in what we've explored today, I encourage you to deepen your understanding and practice of self-compassion. There are many excellent books, guided meditations, and online courses available on this topic. Dr. Kristin Neff's website, selfcompassion.org, is a wonderful place to start, with free resources including guided meditations and exercises you can try at home. For those who prefer more structured support, consider looking into mindful self-compassion courses in your area or online. These 8-week programs provide comprehensive training in self-compassion practices with the guidance of trained teachers. Many therapists are also now incorporating self-compassion into their work, so if you're currently in therapy or considering it, you might ask about including this approach in your treatment. Whatever path you choose, know that the journey towards self-compassion is worthwhile. It may be one of the most important and transformative journeys you ever undertake. In a world that often tells us we're not enough, not successful enough, not attractive enough, not productive enough, choosing to treat ourselves with kindness is a revolutionary act. It challenges the status quo and helps create a culture where authenticity, vulnerability, and compassion are valued over perfection, performance, and achievement at all costs. The practice of self-compassion invites us to ask deeper questions about what truly matters in our lives and what constitutes a life well lived. Rather than constantly striving to meet external standards of success or worth, we can connect with our own inner values and wisdom. We can define success on our own terms, not as achieving some specific outcome or status, but as living with integrity, presence, and care for ourselves and others. This shift in perspective doesn't mean abandoning our goals or aspirations. Rather, it means pursuing them from a place of wholeness rather than lack, from a desire to express our gifts rather than prove our worth. And paradoxically, this more compassionate approach often leads to greater achievement and success because we're able to take risks, learn from failures, collaborate effectively with others, and sustain our energy and motivation over the long term. But even beyond these practical benefits, self-compassion offers something more fundamental. It helps us reconcile with our own humanity. In a culture that often celebrates superhuman achievement and flawless performance, self-compassion reminds us that being human means being imperfect, vulnerable, and finite. It means experiencing the full range of emotions, including difficult ones like fear, grief, and shame. It means making mistakes, having limitations, and sometimes falling short of our own expectations or those of others. Self-compassion allows us to embrace all of this not as evidence of personal failure, but as part of the rich, complex experience of being alive. It helps us find strength not in invulnerability, but in our capacity to meet our struggles with courage and kindness. And it connects us more deeply with others as we recognize that our struggles are not uniquely ours, but part of the shared human condition. In the end, self-compassion is about more than just feeling better about ourselves. It's about transforming our relationship with our own suffering, and by extension, with suffering itself. It's about developing the courage to turn toward pain rather than avoiding it, the wisdom to respond to it with care rather than compounding it with criticism, and the perspective to see our individual struggles within the broader context of our shared humanity. This compassionate perspective doesn't eliminate pain from our lives. Nothing can do that as long as we're alive and connected to others. But it does change our relationship with pain, making it more bearable and less isolating. And it creates space for greater joy, connection, and meaning alongside the inevitable difficulties of life. As we come to the end of our time together today, I want to acknowledge that truly integrating self-compassion into your life is an ongoing process, not a one-time achievement. There will be days when it comes more easily and days when old patterns of self-criticism seem to take over despite your best intentions. On those difficult days, remember that the practice of self-compassion includes having compassion for the parts of yourself that struggle with self-compassion. Even our resistance and setbacks can be met with understanding rather than judgment. The goal isn't perfect self-compassion that would just become another impossible standard to fail at. Rather, the goal is a gradual shift in how you relate to yourself over time, with an understanding that this is a lifelong journey of learning and growth. Each moment offers a new opportunity to choose a compassion over criticism, connection over isolation, and mindful awareness over avoidance or overwhelm. I hope our exploration today has given you both inspiration and practical tools for this journey. I hope you feel encouraged to experiment with self-compassion in your own life and to discover what practices resonate most deeply for you. And I hope you'll be gentle with yourself in the process, celebrating small steps and learning from challenges rather than expecting immediate transformation. Remember that by cultivating greater self-compassion, you're not only enhancing your own well-being but contributing to a more compassionate world. Each person who learns to treat themselves with kindness creates ripples that extend outward, touching the lives of everyone they interact with. In this way, the personal practice of self-compassion becomes a form of service to the larger community and world. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of self-compassion as a key to mental wellness. It's been an honor to share this time with you. If you found value in today's episode, I'd be grateful if you'd consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from this message. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, and experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss future episodes on topics related to mental health and well-being. And if you enjoyed this content, giving it a thumbs up helps others find it too. Until next time, may you be kind to yourself, especially in those moments when it feels most difficult. May you remember your connection to the larger human family. And may you hold your struggles and imperfections in mindful awareness, knowing that they don't diminish your inherent worthiness of compassion and care. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to continuing this journey with you in future episodes. Take care. But wait, before you go, I want to emphasize something important. The practice of self-compassion is not about adding one more thing to your to-do list or giving yourself one more standard to meet. It's about relating differently to your experience as it unfolds in real time. This means that you can begin right now, exactly where you are and as you are. You don't need to change anything about your circumstances, your personality, or your past to be worthy of compassion. You don't need to wait until you feel better, achieve more, or resolve your problems. Self-compassion is available to you in this very moment, exactly as you are, with all your struggles, doubts, confusion, and perceived shortcomings. In fact, it's precisely when we feel most flawed or inadequate that we most need self-compassion. Those difficult moments aren't obstacles to the practice, they're opportunities to practice. Each time we stumble and respond with kindness, rather than criticism, we're strengthening our capacity for self-compassion and creating new patterns in our brains and bodies. So as you move forward from our time together today, I invite you to approach self-compassion not as another self-improvement project, but as a radical act of self-acceptance. Yes, the practices we've discussed can help you develop greater skill in relating compassionately to yourself over time. But the foundation of self-compassion is the recognition that you are worthy of kindness and care exactly as you are in this moment, not because you've earned it through achievement or virtue, but simply because you're a human being experiencing the joys and sorrows of this human life. This unconditional quality of self-compassion is what makes it so powerful and so different from many approaches to well-being that focus primarily on fixing or improving ourselves. While personal growth and positive change are valuable, they're most sustainable when they emerge from a foundation of self-acceptance rather than self-rejection. Consider the difference between these two approaches. When we try to change ourselves from a place of criticism, I'm not good enough as I am, so I need to be different, we're motivated by fear and aversion. This can create temporary bursts of effort, but often leads to cycles of striving and burnout, or to resistance and self-sabotage, because part of us is rebelling against the implicit message that we're fundamentally flawed. In contrast, when we approach growth from a place of self-compassion, I accept myself as I am, and I care about my well-being enough to make positive changes. We're motivated by love and care. This creates a more sustainable foundation for genuine transformation because we're working with ourselves rather than against ourselves. We're addressing problems not because they make us unworthy, but because we deserve to thrive. This compassionate approach to change applies to every area of our lives, from health behaviors to relationships to professional development. For example, research has shown that people who respond to dietary lapses with self-compassion are more likely to return to their healthy eating plans than those who berate themselves for failing. Similarly, students who approach academic challenges with self-compassion show greater motivation to improve after receiving critical feedback than those who are harshly self-critical. The paradox here is profound. Accepting ourselves as we are doesn't lead to complacency, but actually facilitates meaningful growth. When we feel fundamentally secure and worthy, we have the emotional resources to acknowledge our shortcomings honestly, and to take risks that might lead to failure in the short term, but growth in the long term. We can learn from criticism without being devastated by it, and we can celebrate our progress without becoming dependent on external validation. As you continue your exploration of self-compassion beyond our time together today, I encourage you to notice how this plays out in your own life. When you approach a challenge or a desired change from a place of self-criticism, what happens? How does it feel in your body? What quality of energy does it create? And when you approach the same situation with self-compassion, what shifts? What becomes possible that wasn't before? These observations aren't about judging yourself for being self-critical. That would just be another layer of criticism. Rather, they're about developing greater awareness of how different inner approaches affect your experience and your effectiveness. Over time, this awareness itself becomes a powerful catalyst for change as you naturally begin to choose the approaches that serve you better. One important clarification before we part ways: self-compassion doesn't mean never experiencing difficult emotions like sadness, anger, or shame. It doesn't mean maintaining positive feelings about yourself at all times or denying when you've made a mistake. In fact, self-compassion is most powerful precisely when we're struggling with painful emotions or acknowledging our failures and flaws. What self-compassion offers is a way to be with these difficult experiences that doesn't compound our suffering unnecessarily. It gives us the courage to face our pain directly rather than avoiding it, the perspective to see our struggles as part of the larger human experience rather than isolating defects, and the kindness to comfort rather than condemn ourselves when we're hurting. This way of relating to our difficulties doesn't eliminate them, but it does transform how we experience them and how quickly we can move through them and learn from them. In a world that often measures human value in terms of productivity, appearance, wealth, or status, choosing to value yourself unconditionally is a profound act of courage and wisdom. It challenges the dominant narratives of our culture and offers a different vision of what it means to live well, not as flawless performance or endless achievement, but as authentic presence and wholehearted engagement with the full spectrum of human experience. This vision of wellness includes achievement and success, certainly, but not at the expense of connection, compassion, and inner peace. It acknowledges our deep human needs for purpose and contribution while also honoring our needs for rest, play, and simply being without constantly doing. and it recognizes that our worth isn't something we earn through our actions, but something inherent in our existence as conscious, feeling beings capable of both suffering and joy. As our time together comes to a close, I want to express my deep gratitude for your attention and openness to this exploration of self-compassion. The fact that you've devoted this time to learning about more compassionate ways of relating to yourself speaks to your commitment to your own well-being and growth. That commitment itself is an act of self-compassion, and I honor you for it. I hope you'll continue this journey of self-compassion in whatever ways feel authentic and supportive for you. Remember that there are many resources available to support you, from books and guided meditations to therapists and community groups. You don't have to figure it all out on your own. And while the path may not always be straightforward, the destination, a more compassionate relationship with yourself, is well worth the journey. As you move through your day-to-day and the days to come, I invite you to hold yourself with gentleness, especially in moments of struggle or perceived failure. Remember that your imperfections don't separate you from others, but connect you to our shared humanity. And know that in choosing self-compassion, you're not only transforming your own experience, but contributing to a more compassionate world for all of us. Thank you again for joining me. Until next time, may you treat yourself with the same kindness and care that you would offer to someone you deeply love, because you deserve nothing less. Before you go, if you've enjoyed this episode and found it valuable, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us reach more people with these important messages about mental health and well-being. And if you know someone who might benefit from learning about self-compassion, please share this video with them. It could make a real difference in their life. Thank you for being part of our community, and I look forward to connecting with you again in our next episode. Remember, the journey to mental wellness isn't about reaching some perfect state of being, but about relating to our imperfect human experience with greater kindness, awareness, and understanding. And that journey begins with how we treat ourselves. So as you go about your day, ask yourself, how can I be a better friend to myself right now? The answer to that question might just be the key that unlocks a more fulfilling and mentally healthy life. Now, as we've discussed throughout this episode, developing self-compassion isn't always easy. Our inner critics can be loud and persistent, and our culture often reinforces the idea that we need to be hard on ourselves to succeed. So I want to acknowledge that if you're finding this challenging, you're not alone. Many people struggle initially with self-compassion practices, especially if they've spent years or decades with a highly self-critical mindset. What matters isn't how quickly you master these skills, but your willingness to keep coming back to them, to keep choosing compassion over criticism whenever you remember to do so. Each compassionate moment builds on the last, gradually creating new neural pathways and new emotional habits that become more natural and accessible over time. And remember that the purpose of self-compassion isn't to feel good all the time. That's neither possible nor desirable in a full human life. Rather, it's about relating differently to all of your experiences, including the painful ones. It's about developing the capacity to hold your suffering in a larger space of awareness and care, rather than being completely identified with it or trying to push it away. In this way, self-compassion becomes not just a set of practices, but a way of being in the world, one that acknowledges both our vulnerability and our strength, our limitations and our possibilities, our individuality and our profound connection to all of life. It's a path toward wholeness that embraces all parts of ourselves, even those we might prefer to disown or hide. As you continue on this path, may you discover the deep well of courage, wisdom, and love that exists within you. May you find the support you need when the journey becomes difficult. And may your growing self-compassion ripple outward, touching all whose lives intersect with yours. Thank you for your presence and attention today. I'm Dr. Olivia Bennett, and I look forward to continuing these conversations with you in future episodes. Until then, be well, be kind to yourself, and remember that you are worthy of compassion simply because you exist. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you'll know when new episodes are available. If you found this content valuable, Giving it a thumbs up helps our channel grow. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences with self-compassion. I'd love to hear from you and continue this important conversation. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.